All right, it is time for my first time doing these recommendation videos, and there is a cat down here because he's a lot today, and I want to film these videos, and I'm really excited for this one. You won't be able to see it, but I am wearing my like spooky shirt with like a kitty cat on it with a trick or treat bag, but can't show it to you because I have this thing. But we're gonna talk about spooky, haunting stories for October, so you can finish the month strong with any reads you might want to get to. And I'm just excited because I've never been able to make this type of recommendation video before because I hadn't read enough spooky stuff. And it's long, so we should probably just get into it. There's no rhyme or order or reason. There's just only going to be one dark fairy tale that I mention. The rest, I have a dark fairy tale recommendation video. I just recently did a video deep diving into 2 dark fairy tales that were released this year. So this is primarily different types of spooky and atmospheric things that I associate with this time of year. Let's get into it. Oh, you're going to definitely see a paw once in a while. He is something today. But anyways, the first one I'll mention briefly because it is on my dark fairy tale list, and that's The Changeling by Victor LaValle. I love this story. It's set in contemporary New York City. There's a man who's trying to figure out what's going on with my wife and trying to figure out what's wrong or can he save his son. It's a lovely story. It definitely pulls from like Brothers Grimm dark types of fairy tales. There's a moments at the beginning where I was actively scared and was like, oh, I should not read this at night. It doesn't stay that way, so I wouldn't say that this is like super horror, but for people who are like dipping their toes in like I was last year, really recommend. I talk about it more in another video. I love this book. But another Victor LaValle that's perfect for this list, perfect if you're trying to collect a bunch of novellas and shorter works for maybe Halloween weekend, is The Ballad of Black Tom. This is more Lovecraftian inspired. I don't want to go too much into the plot trappings because it is so short. And kind of part of it is the discovery of it all, but there are definitely inclusions of mythological creatures from other cultures. It's creepy. It has what I remember my feelings after reading maybe an Edgar Allan Poe. I kind of wish it was a little longer, but if I put it in that genre of just like short, creepy works that kind of haunt me and stay with me afterwards, because the ending is something I really like, it's definitely on that list. It also incorporates music, and in both The Changeling and this, New York City is a character in its own right, and I personally love that. I love how cities can embody cultures, and this one, The Ballad of Black Tom, I think is less contemporary and more in the past. It's worth it for this time of year. I think both of these would work really well for Blackoween, that's being hosted by Bria the Lockpictician, so check it out. Pivoting then into, like I said, there's no rhyme or reason to this list. Build Your House Around My Body, which I loved. This is more literary horror. I think if you go into it wanting a pure traditional horror haunting, you might be disappointed, but like, it's so creepy, and it's got like supernatural horror vibes. Like there's weird shape-shifting, there are ghosts, there are spirits, it's got possession. I really like this book. I don't really know how to talk about it, but we have Winnie who goes missing, and the whole story is about what happened to Winnie. So there's a lot of nonlinear storytelling to it. You start in the present day where she goes missing, and then you go to the past and you catch up, but it's not 2 timelines, it's many timelines, lots of threads being woven together. And for me, at least, as a reader, eventually the point didn't become what happened to Winnie. I was just along for the ride. Like, I really just wanted to know what was happening with all of these threads and characters, and I loved the outcome. Like, I truly love the ending of this book so much. I think when I finished it, I gave it 4.5 stars, but I think about it a lot. I think I might give it 5 stars eventually. Ryan's reading it right now, and I just love discussing it with him and seeing what parts he's at. It's great, especially if you want some Vietnamese folklore haunting trappings to your work, because this takes place in Vietnam, which is also awesome. Like, there's a creepy forest. It has so many of my, like, atmospheric setting buzzwords for myself. There are creepy houses. It's a good time. Like, if you're at all okay with the fact that this is, like, such a non-linear time, you should give it a go. Another house-related one, this is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. I read it the same month I read Build Your House Around My Body, and this is about, like, a haunted house, and I won't talk too much about it because a lot of it's discovery, but we have our main character who is going home after many years, and it's her relationship to her hometown and her house, and I'm not going to talk about what's even on the flap because I didn't know it going in, but there is this contentious relationship between her and the town and the world, and you're trying to figure out what happened. Now, if you want that answer, it is on the flap of the book. But for me, I loved figuring out why is she the way she is, like, and unpacking her character, because she is really an untrustworthy protagonist. You really don't know what's true, what's not true. What is she holding back from herself It's one of those types of characters which I tend to really enjoy. I wish the ending was drawn out a bit longer. I think the ending definitely hits people different ways, but it had to be on this list. It was very good. And then another one we'll talk about, that's actually another Sarah Gailey. So we'll continue with Sarah Gailey, and that's The Echo Wife. I like this one way more than Just Like Home. It has, again, a type of character where you're trying to figure out, why are you so messy as a protagonist? Like, why are you the way you are? And this is a story where she ends up having to help her husband's new wife with a precarious situation, and it discusses what does it mean to be human, what is nature versus nurture, what is a learned behavior versus a taught behavior, and what do we carry with us through generational trauma, all wrapped up in like kind of a psychological thriller that I couldn't put down, and it was great. So if you want kind of a darker protagonist to follow this time of year, because I kind of really like those types of stories for like the autumnal time, highly recommend. So pivoting from there to a younger protagonist, we have The Icarus Girl, which is a literary work I read recently that definitely has haunting, speculative stuff going on. She's Nigerian, and she goes to Nigeria from Britain, so she's British Nigerian, I believe, the main character. And while she's there, she meets a new friend, and she has a hard time making friends. She doesn't connect with a lot of people her age, and also she's biracial, so that also plays into it. And the way she just engages with the world is different. Her brain works differently. I really love a precocious young child, and I relate a lot to what she was going through. And so while she's in Nigeria, she meets a friend, and she loves this girl. She thinks she's so cool, and then we learn there's more to this person than meets the eye. Maybe she's not someone that should be trusted. Maybe she has her own agenda, and it gets creepy. There are definitely some scenes where I'm just like, if I was a kid, I'd be terrified. And this isn't for kids, this is for adults. But it made me feel like how like Goosebumps used to make me feel, where I'm like, oh, this is unsettling. What is happening? Because the stakes are pretty high in this story as things just keep going and going and going. And you're just like, where does it end? How do we resolve this situation that was started? Because there are a lot of unintentional consequences. So it's got those type of vibes. Definitely, I think, good for people who don't like really graphic horror, because I think a lot of it is kind of metaphysical at times. But yeah, it's definitely got haunting stuff. And another one that's more literary, speculative haunting is Folklorn, which I read last year and really liked. This one is definitely more literary and just has these like... There's like this ghost girl around with this red ribbon. So that's like kind of the more like haunting vibe to it. But really we have our main character struggling with her identity and her family. I believe, I'm trying to remember the motivation of the story, but I believe her mother just passed away. And so she's going back home and has to grapple with that, grapple with her work life, because she's a physicist who typically works in Antarctica or I believe Sweden. And so she's just trying to really figure out her place in the world, her identity as a Korean American, and grapple with her difficult living situation with her parents and her mother. And a lot of that is also tied into these Korean folk tales and this like haunting of this girl. And yeah, so this one's definitely not super spooky, but if you want like that atmospheric haunting, I think it would be a good time. Do you want out now, Putao? Have I overwhelmed you with love? I doubt it. The cat is now out of my lap, but not out of the room, so we'll see how this goes. All right. Another haunting book is Summer Suns. I read this last year. It's definitely gothic horror, light dark academia vibes. It's not really about the dark academia, but if you want a story that really goes into grief and how difficult grief can be and how much there's this weight of depressive energy, this will definitely give you those vibes. Our main character loses his best friend right before he's supposed to join him for grad school at this university. And of course, it's more than just an accident. There's stuff to uncover. There's this mystery there. But it's not like a mystery, fast-paced book. A lot of it is spent unpacking this person's grief and also unpacking his kind of unspoken sexual desires for this person, and where does that put him in the different communities he's never explored. It really focuses in on toxic masculinity in the queer community. So we have a lot of fascinating discussion about that. And yeah, there's some haunting imagery. I mean, the cover of the book I think is scarier than the book itself. But if you want that type of vibe, I think it's very vibey. I listened to a lot of like raining sounds while I read this book. Next one that had to be on this list, Sarland by River Solomon. I love this book. I talk about this book a lot, I think. I think I've talked about it recently in like a Hugo's video. I've talked about it in like a favorite books of all time. I love Sarland. And this is such a good combination of like fast-paced, can't put down, cult, speculative, what's happening to our main character, thriller, horror-ish thing. Genre does not help this book. But our main character, Vern, when you meet her, is in the forest and giving birth to her children, and she's basically just run away from a very toxic community. And you spend this book learning about Vern and her past, while also in the present being like, what is happening to Vern? Because things are happening to Vern, and I'll leave it vague. And yeah, it's just this story of Vern as a mother. You have a lot of discussion of that. You have a lot of discussion of community. You have a lot of discussion about race and status and class in America. There's just so much to unpack with a really fun, can't put down plot. I mean, I don't know if even fun's the right word, but I could not look away. I was there the entire time on the edge of my seat wanting to know how these characters are going to make it. And also for me, it has the we're trying to survive in the forest trope, which I don't know if that's actually a trope, but I love survival stories as well. And this has a little bit of that in the beginning of it. One that would probably be better on like a winter recommendation video, but it also is very like possessive story. So I'm putting it here as well. And that's Temper. And this is also very graphic. So this is Nikki Drayden. I have a author spotlight, is not an author who shies away from graphic descriptions in her books. And that is very true here, where we have our main character kind of maybe become possessed by a demon near their winter solstice and does some stuff. Yeah, is compelled to do some things that are quite graphic, and kind of it goes from there. And this society is really cool though. In terms of like a fantasy book, 'cause this is probably more dark fantasy than anything else. Although, like I said, the reason I kind of put it here is like it kind of reminds me of like a werewolf story, even though it's not a werewolf story, if that makes sense. But in this world, we have people born in pairs, and there are vices and virtues, and they get split between the individuals, and our main character literally has none of the virtues and all the vices, and their sibling is the reverse. So the society itself is fascinating to follow, and like it kind of starts with vibes you would associate with like a school setting part of maybe a young adult story, but then it's also way too graphic and dark and disturbing to, I think, be published there, which is why it wasn't. Although it is published by Harper Voyager, which is like an imprint that I think does thrive on a lot of crossover appeal. But then it kind of pivots into a different story, and then it pivots into a different story. Nikki Drayden is able to give me a book that I can't put down, so even though this book's like 300, 400 pages, I read it in a day. So, if you're looking for books you can like fit in for your own personal 48-hour readathon or just, a Halloween weekend, this is dark. This has some possession. It's a good time. And now we have a few more. Yeah, like I said, I have so many. Well, let's lean into the more graphic descriptions and weird time with The Library at Mount Char. This book is all the content warnings, especially graphic violence and depictions of things on page. Like if you're someone who's like, well, normally I can manage it being talked about but not seeing it, look up your content warnings because The Library at Mount Char might have them. This is a story of this woman who was taken in by a man with a bunch of her other siblings, and they were all trained in a specific skill set, and it wasn't a good upbringing. It was very toxic. It was very harmful. And you kind of follow her after she cracks and see what she burns is probably the easiest synopsis I can give without giving anything away. But also, this book's bizarre, man. But it's something. It's dark. It's gripping. I couldn't put it down. So if that's something you kind of like from, your visualization this time of year, I would pick it up. I really want to reread it so badly. And a book that, I don't actually think is a good comp for it, but I when people like this book, I'm like, well, maybe you like The Library of Mount Char and vice versa, even though they really aren't that similar. But I'm putting it on the list, and that's Middle Game by Shauna Maguire. I don't think I've ever read this in fall, but it feels like a fall book. And again, has some graphic moments in it, and the alchemy of it all is very Frankenstein. So if you associate this time of year with young Frankenstein or creating monsters and should we be creating these things and what are the repercussions, that theme is definitely in here. Although if you know me, I love this book because of Roger and Dodger and watching them grow up and fall in and out of each other's lives. It definitely has the prestigious college background for a lot of the book, and the sacrificing of the human body to be able to do certain magics happen. So the aesthetic of it I think fits this list, even though I don't think the tone of it does. And similarly, I have two other books that are more aesthetic driven than they are, I think, going to give you spooky vibes. One is The Bone Orchard. There's the main character literally splits herself into these bone ghosts to kind of process her trauma, and then the actual setting of the world is very I don't know if it's dark Victorian, but it gave me those vibes. And it's very macabre at times. And just, there's a revolution happening. There are these psychic powers that need to be controlled. And we have very cruel people in power. So this is another one where aesthetically, I think it fits this list. Even if I don't necessarily think of it as a spooky read. But there are bone ghosts. Look at this cover. It kind of gives that vibe. Another one that I'm going to mention, because it says necromancy, and this is the time of year for necromancy, is Gideon the Ninth, especially because Nona the Ninth just came out. This is not, though, a horror book or a sci-fi book in its own right. This is more like a competition fantasy with closed circle mystery, but there is a lot of necromancy, and it does have a very dark aesthetic to it. So, like, it in my head, when I was reading it, did give me that, like, gothic, weird aesthetic, even though it's nowhere close to what, you know, we would traditionally think of as gothic, you know, set in our world or anything like that. But, like, it felt gothic adjacent. So I'm going to briefly mention it for that reason. One of my favorite psychological horrors is what I'll talk about next, and that's Vida Nostra. This is, like, my peak dark academia, my peak psychological horror. I think I gave this 4 stars when I read it last year. But I recommend it so much, and I think about it still so much that it's a 5-star at this point. This book is one of the few books that truly, I think, makes you feel like how the character's feeling. And I just think that's art. And it's such a good representation of how toxic and bad competitive academia is, how we burn people out, how we overwork them, and that's just, like, the layer I took from it. I'm sure there are so many layers because this book is too smart for me. But it's still just such a weird time that you can just go with it, because in many ways our character is not smart enough for the situation either. Briefly, our character gets introduced to a man on vacation, and he's like, do these things for me. And then eventually it turns into, if you don't do these things, we will harm your family. So then she feels compelled to do these things to save her family. And reality gets twisted along the way, is really the best way I can describe it. It's weird. It's perfect for this time of year. I hear there are sequels coming out, but this is kind of a standalone. At least I treated it like a standalone, regardless of how you feel about the ending. The ending may or may not feel like a standalone, depending on who you are as a reader. But I am excited to reread this one day because it's just so messed up. It's just truly a really messed up time, but in, like, a mind-bendy way. It's not messed up like the other ones where I'm like, this is very graphic and, like, I don't even know what genre it is. Like, no, this one's just, like, messes with your mind just a little bit. One that's more campy. I wanted to have a campier one on my list. At least for me, this is, like, kind of my definition of, like, what I want from, like, a campy vampire movie. And that's Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is my favorite. And I think it's because I love Domingo with all my heart. Domingo is a cinnamon roll. So there's a cinnamon roll character who is just trying to help Atul, our vampire, who is in a city she shouldn't be because vampires are not allowed in Mexico City. And it's kind of like a sweeter version of Underworld at times. Like, there's these action scenes, and they're basically just in this mess, and it has that cyberpunk kind of atmosphere background, too. So it's like a cyberpunk Mexico City world with vampires, and it was a really fun time. There's also a dog, if you like dogs in your books. All right, what else haven't I mentioned on this list? Okay, there's 2 more I mentioned. These are short story things. The first one just came out this month, and I've read it, and that's Faya. This is their current issue. It has a lot of great stories that explore generational trauma, hauntings, houses. I could not put this collection down. I read it in a day. It's like $3, I think. You should check it out. This cover's gorgeous. Faya is definitely a magazine that I need to look into more of their back catalog, because if they can curate an anthology this well for my tastes, I'm excited. All right, I had to let the cat out, and we'll talk about the last book because he could not wait for me to finish this. But Her Body and Other Parties. I love this book. This is one of my favorite collections of all time. It's up there with Ted Chiang and Ken Liu for me. Like, they're neck and neck. This is feminist horror. It's about a woman's experience with her body, with herself, with other people. It's got mental representation. It has physical representation. The first story is, like, textbook creepy. It's like short story you read at night with a candle while it's raining. Textbook. There's this SVU experimental story that most people don't like, but I just think is wild. I love this. I've read it twice. I'll probably read it again. The copy's, like, right behind me. So I couldn't make this list without mentioning that, because honestly, I think that was, like, how I got into speculative horror-ish, was like with that collection, because like, ooh, it was so creepy and unsettling, but in a thematic way that I really enjoy. Because if you can't tell maybe from this list, that sometimes I do just like things that are like atmospheric and vibey, but like I also like things that like thematically find ways of expressing like the darker sides of humans in like a really compelling way. I don't know. I'm still very early days in my horror life, but these are some spooky-ish things, spooky adjacent or directly horror, that I recommend, that I really enjoyed reading. And so hopefully, if you still needed recommendations, this will be helpful. But if you want to leave an emoji, leave a ghosty emoji. We talked a lot about hauntings, and give me any recommendations based off this list down in the comments so I can either read them this month or get to them next year. And like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.